our intention to rightfully include their voice, respect them as the 27 sovereign tribal nations of Nevada. And we just want to thank again our panelists and everyone that joined us today, and help educate us and help us know how to really engage with you. So we're going to take a moment and ask everybody to turn their camera on briefly. Our friend Aubrey from marketing will be taking our picture, and we'll do it and keep on trucking.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for turning your cameras on. I'm going to wait a couple more minutes so we can get everyone's beautiful faces on here. So I feel like everyone is ready. Oh, there we go. So I'm going to count us down with a 3, 2, 1. So ready? 3, 2, 1. Let me get the second page of people so that we get everyone. All right, ready? 3, 2, 1. Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So we're going to start out with our panelists introducing themselves. I might ad-lib in anything that they missed, but I'd like to start, and I'll throw it out to both of you. Between Shay and Kostin, you decide who goes first and share the space so we get to know a little bit about you, and then we'll roll into our questions. It's yours.
You can go first, Shay.
I was almost going to let you go first because you had your mute off. Anyway, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shay Backus for to celebrate Indian Heritage Month. I think it's important for me to share. I'm also a citizen of Cherokee, which is in Oklahoma. And I'm also a third-generation Nevadan, born and raised right here in Las Vegas. My mom is from my family where I am Native American. My mom's parents had a lot of land in Oklahoma, northeast Oklahoma. My grandfather ended up being brought out here to work at the Nevada test site. And that's what brought my mom to Las Vegas and married my dad. And hence I was born here in Las Vegas, but I had the pleasure of spending my summers back in northeast portion of Oklahoma. And I ended up going to law school and studying Indian law, getting a certificate at Arizona State University, which is now known as the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. I've been practicing law here in our community now close to 20 years. I've had the privilege of practicing, I believe, in 3 tribal courts, and being able to take that knowledge that I learned at ASU, as well as doing an internship at the Office of Tribal Justice at the Department of Justice during law school. And then I had the pleasure of running in 2018 to serve in the Nevada State Assembly and won that race, and served 1 session, lost in 2020. And right now I'm waiting to finalize the results on running a 3rd time and hopefully returning to Carson City to serve our great state. When I won in 2019, I kind of was a part of 2 big firsts. The first was I was part of the first female majority state legislature in US history. And also I was the first female tribal member to serve in the state of Nevada in the assembly. And I'm also, I know they give us 5 minutes, but I'm sure through answering questions, I'll be able to probably share a little more about myself. And I will turn it over to Kostin.
Thank you very much. In listening to your introduction, I'm surprised that we haven't really met or spent any time with each other, because I'm also Native, I'm also a lawyer, and I've also done politics. So it's very interesting to hear somebody else on the same path. And I apologize to everybody for the double dose of lawyers on the meeting. My name is Kostin Lathoris. It's a very Greek name. My father was born and raised in Greece, came over here when he was 18. If he had his way, my name would be Konstantinos Evangelos Lathoris. And so this is actually the shortened version. And the reason why my name isn't that long version is because my mom's not Greek. She's Southern Paiute. We're enrolled members of the Chemehuevi Indian tribe. Our reservation is located in Havasu Lake, California, which is about 2.5 hours south of Las Vegas. But Las Vegas is part of our ancestral lands. We are the Nuwu, we are Nuwuvi. And Mount Charleston's actually the point of creation for the Southern Paiute. And so I'm very fortunate to be able to say I've been born and raised on my people's ancestral lands. Growing up, my grandmother would take me back to the reservation all the time, usually at least twice a month. And we'd go to the council meetings. And we'd be the cool kids. We'd sit in the back of every council meeting. We'd always know what was going on. And we'd talk about it so much afterwards with the family and with whoever was in the community wanted to stop by. And as I got older, I wanted to be more involved in my tribe, and that's what I did. My grandmother and I served on various boards, commissions, and committees. And ultimately, I decided to go to law school so that way I could study federal, Indian, and tribal law and go back and work for my tribe, because we didn't have anybody in the office of the tribal attorney who was a tribal member. And so I thought that would be something nice for the tribe to have that option. Ultimately, I ended up serving on tribal council for my tribe. My term ended earlier this year. And so I spent a couple of years serving on tribal council, which is the governing body of the tribe. I'm also the chair of the Nevada Indian Commission. I was originally appointed by Governor Sandoval and then reappointed by Governor Sisolak. And so the Nevada Indian Commission is that liaison agency between the state and the tribes, bands, and colonies here in the state of Nevada. And I've also had some other work and experience too, but that's pretty much it. And similar to Shay, I'm sure we'll get to know each other a little bit more throughout some questions. So thank you very much for having me here.
I think you might be muted, Dolores.
Thank you. So it's no mystery that we have two attorneys that are serving through their ethnic pride in their heart and helping everybody understand not just the work that they're doing, but also the legal ramifications of advocacy and support. So we are very fortunate to have both of you, and with a political background of navigating how can we improve our relationships and be more respectful. So we are going to, the first question will be, again, they will share the space and put your comments in the chat. We will get to all the comments, and we do want to engage all of the members that are on the call today, and as well as introducing yourself and saying what organization you're with. So we appreciate that. The first question today is, what are some of the accomplishments from your time at the legislature and also just serving on the boards and in government positions, I'll add that has positively influenced the urban, Indian, and tribal communities? And you might want to start with the background, what the difference is between reservations and urban settings, and help us understand the governing of these lands and access. Because at the end of this discussion, I know all of the nonprofits on this call will want to know, how do we work together? How can we reach out and do outreach that's appropriate, culturally sensitive, to include everyone, and that you teach us and you help us know how to do that. So I'll throw that out to both of you and take your time.
I can address the difference in the status of lands and the significance of that, if that's all right, Shay. Okay. So I think a lot of people have heard the term reservation. And for the most part, there is a lot of reservation lands when we talk about Indian country. Indian country refers to all the lands that are subject to either federal laws governing Indians or tribal law itself. And so there's different types of lands. There could be trust lands, there could be fee lands. It gets really technical really quick, and I don't think anybody really wants to spend too much time talking about property law. But what people should know is that when we talk about tribal lands, we're talking about usually lands that the federal government owns in trust for the tribe. And so it means that that tribe is not subject to state law, state regulatory law especially. And that means that tribe gets to make their own laws and be governed by those laws, consistent with federal law within those lands. And so there's reservations, there's bands, there's colonies. Honestly, I don't hear the term colony a lot outside the state of Nevada, but for the most part, it just means that it's land that's governed by a tribe that might be separate from its main reservation, but it's still under the governance of that one tribe. And when we talk about federally recognized tribes, because we threw out a number, and that number represents the tribes that are sovereign nations, they're political entities. And as a frame of reference, all nations internationally need to be recognized by other nations. But for tribes in the United States, since we're within the United States, the only recognition we need is from the United States government. And so there's a list of federally recognized tribes. There's 574 of them. And those are governments that have the power to act as governments. And so that's a little bit of a primer. And if there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
I'll just speak for a moment before Shay, then we welcome you. So is it acceptable or appropriate to refer to reservations? So one most familiar with us in Southern Nevada would be Paiute, correct? So when we address, is it acceptable to refer to the Paiute reservation, or should we call it something else?
Good question. And so that's another thing to be mindful of, which is when the federal government recognized tribes, it wasn't really going through and finding everybody that was part of the same socio-cultural group. A lot of times it was they found some Indians at a certain point, they grouped them together, and they placed them on a reservation. And so the Paiute in Las Vegas is the Las Vegas Band of Paiutes. They're Southern Paiutes, just like Moapa Band of Paiutes, just like Chemehuevi. And there's other federally recognized tribes that are Paiutes too. And sometimes the federal government created a reservation where there's multiple groups, even if they didn't always get along, that would now have to share this land and govern it together. And so when we talk about the Las Vegas Paiutes, they have a colony down off Main Street in Las Vegas.
Right.
And they call it a colony because it's actually separate geographically from its main reservation. If I remember correctly, they call it the Snow Mountain Reservation. And so just like if we were to travel to another place, we'd want to do a little research ahead of time and figure out what do they call themselves. For example, in New Mexico, they wouldn't say reservations, they would say pueblos for the most part.
Right.
And so just with each one, it could be different. And so just a little research ahead of time. And sometimes that research is a little difficult, but if you ask around, hopefully you'll find somebody who knows. And the Nevada Indian Commission does have a good resource for where the different tribes are in the state of Nevada, what their territories are, and what their names are.
Perfect. We'll get that into the notes that we send out after the call. Thank you.
Of course.
And Shay, your thoughts?
And I do want to piggyback on what Costin was saying, because I think for a lot of people, Costin and I both live this, so we understand a lot of the nuances that I think a lot of people just don't understand because you're not living in it. And there was one thing I wanted to add is there's always this confusion about like a race situation, and that's not what it is. Each tribe can control its own citizenship, and sometimes it goes way back to like original bylaws, or each tribe is changing how their citizenship is determined. For example, Summit Lake is a tribal, and I think they actually have a reservation, and then they have like an office that's like in Reno, and I don't know if they call that part a colony, but they do have an office where a lot of their tribal council will meet, because not too many people can actually live where Summit Lake is. And I think there's only one person, maybe an engineer, that lives there. And because their population was decreasing so much, they had to go in and change what their laws were governing their tribal citizenship. So it's all controlled by each tribe. Some tribes, it's very fascinating. And I kind of heard Costin kind of pause, because before the Las Vegas Paiutes used to be a mix of Southern and Northern Paiute. And I think around the time I graduated law school in 2003, they had discontinued recognizing Northern Paiute and determining tribal citizenship. So it's really specific for each tribe. One thing I wanted to add, because I come from a different type of tribe where obviously our ancestral lands are in the southeast portion of the United States. Most people are familiar learning maybe in history, the Trail of Tears, and it's where a lot of 5 tribes were moved to Oklahoma, believing it was going to be an Indian state. And so each of the tradies defined where their lands were going to be, and land was given to actual individual Indian members, and that's where you get allotted lands. And then we have a huge urban population that a lot of people don't know about in Nevada. About 60,000 Native Americans live right here in the Las Vegas area. A majority, I believe, are Navajo. So it's quite interesting. And so I can segue into one of the questions with respect to looking at legislation. I think how people realized I was a tribal member as I was sitting in a growth and infrastructure hearing where the Department of Motor Vehicles brought a bill to start recognizing tribal IDs. And they were making tribal identification sound like it was like a Nevada driver's license. And I'm sitting there thinking, and I'm like, knowing what my tribal ID looks like. And they're like, we can recognize this. We brought props. Mine's not here because it's in my car, probably in my purse, where I leave my purse when I'm at home. But I remember sitting in this hearing, and I'm kind of going through all these factors they wanted from a tribal ID for Nevada Department of Motor Vehicles to recognize such identification. And I'm giggling to myself. I'm thinking, this is not right. So but I blurted out because I'm like, I'm sure someone didn't even ask the Nevada tribes, colonies, bands, and reservations what their IDs look like. And sure enough, they hadn't. I started picking on different things, and they hadn't even thought about it. And so it was kind of important that I happened to be in the legislature at that time, and then also sitting on that committee and brought awareness to that. But I think some of my proudest work that I've been able to do was after I served, and during the session that I was not serving, is I was active in our Native American caucus, where we had kind of came up with some great ideas that could really help basically some of the tribal descendants, which sometimes do not live within their reservation boundaries or in their colony, or what would be where they would be citizens of. And one of the bills I think I'm proudest of helping with was Assemblywoman Natha Anderson from Reno brought a bill to allow tribal members from Nevada tribes to attend one of our state schools under a tuition waiver. And what they still, a lot of other fees have to be paid for, but the reality of it is it really helps, and it goes to descendancy. So it's not necessarily just based on membership of that tribe, it goes to descendancy. So if a tribe says, and some tribes do, so for example, if you're Navajo, their tribal membership, and this is how it was in 2003. So if I'm incorrect, and Costin, please feel free to correct me, but I believe their membership was determined on blood quantum, and it was a quarter blood quantum back in the day. And if you were an ape, you would not fall within that qualification. And so to make it easy in Nevada, we based it on descendancy, which is easy because a lot of us, not only will we have a tribal membership, but we also do have the Bureau of Indian Affairs will also recognize us. I also have a BIA card, which will show my blood quantum on that. But a lot of people were moving away from that instead of focusing on how much Indian do you have. For us, it's more about our geopolitical status. My citizenship is Cherokee. And it's interesting. I mean, because it goes back to the history that I know a lot of people probably are studying now, especially with what's going on with boarding schools and looking at assimilation and trying to take away our Native American heritage. And that's what had traditionally happened. I mean, I think about my grandfather who left Oklahoma to go into the military and then ended up at the Nevada test site. And a lot of that was because of where he went to school and just him growing up. So the tuition waiver was probably my favorite. We also looked at culturally sensitive names being used, like, for example, like Squaw on one of the mountains. So some of the geographical areas in Nevada are reconsidering how they're naming different geographic sites, as well as school, like mascots, things like that. And so those were probably the two biggest bills that I had the privilege of working on when I wasn't in the legislature, but just as a regular member of our community here in Nevada.
Thank you, Shay. So my takeaway from both of you at this point is, number one, I want to pause and open it up if people have anything in the chat or if they want to speak up. This is a lot of information, and I'm visual, I'm creative, and I'm thinking, what does that family tree look like? wouldn't that be the asset map of just figuring out reservations and colonies and tribal councils? So thank you for the serving and the services on behalf of everybody. And again, trying to go around with enough ID to prove what your, lineage is, what your heritage is absolutely, sometimes we get a little bit, I don't know, we have a driver's license and a passport, right? We simplify it and we can get away with a lot, but it's really interesting, and social security card, but it's interesting to see these cross-cultural needs of having to prove who you are to get what you deserve and what you've earned. And so just a moment, I'd like to see if there's any hands up. And Jasmine, help me if there's anyone with a hand up. Or we can move on.
And I'd like to just say
I
for these
see.
questions too,
Yes.
if anybody
Yes.
has any questions about tribes at all in general, like this is a safe space to ask and to learn. I'm happy to answer any type of question related to tribes.
Thank you. Paul, did you have something now, or do you want to save it?
I do have something now. 211, we try to reach out, and we've had some success over the years working with the tribal communities, like the Paiute tribe here locally. We did have a good relationship with them, and then it seems like the pandemic has just, ruined a lot of things and contact people and places. I used to go out to their events several times a year and whatever, but I never get any invitations or things from them. We do an annual verification update, try to do the best we can. And I deal with I was at the Palms back in June for the Intertribal Council thing here. Great event, educational, wonderful music and entertainment and stuff like that. So that was great. And like I say, sometimes it's difficult, and we're wanting to get back out and to get out to the tribal nations and places throughout Nevada and to educate them about 211. And we definitely understand in our listings with the tribal places that we have on board, we do have it where it says for Native Americans only, in that aspect. But sometimes we do have communication gap, or that if we try to reach out, sometimes it's trying to, it's all about knowing the right person. I think so. I reckon what I'm trying to say is do you have any contact people locally or some of the places that you could help us, so I could reach out to and try to build better relationships and educate them that even though you have tribal services, there's other services available for them.
Thank you.
So
Yes.
there's 574 federally recognized tribes. And I'm saying this just as some context for my answer. Not every tribe has the same amount of land. Some tribes don't even have any land. Not every tribe has land that is economically viable for certain things that have done well for other tribes. Generally speaking, there's no tribe that I've ever met that wanted to be dependent on federal grants. They've all wanted to be self-sufficient in one form or the other. It's just finding a way for them to be able to do that. And that's actually one of my favorite parts about the work that I do, because it's nation building, trying to figure that out so the tribes can make their own decisions and be governed by them. But unfortunately, there's a lot of tribes that have very limited institutional capacity. And so I've met a lot of people who want to help with tribes. But the problem is kind of this gap that I think you were alluding to, Paul, which is how do you find a way to communicate with the tribe? In my own experience serving on tribal council, we would meet once a month as a governing body. It would be the last Saturday of every month. About a couple of days beforehand, like 3 or 4 days ahead of time, I would get my packet for the council. My packets were generally about 700 pages. So I'd have to read all those things to be up to date on what's going to happen at this meeting so I could be prepared to vote on it. And then you think about, well, what are tribes dealing with? Water, education, roads. relationships with other tribes, relationships with the federal government, state litigation. Tribes have a lot of rights, but they're not always respected. And so I spent quite a bit of time litigating and fighting that. And the reason why I say this is because I'm sure there's a lot of tribes that would love to work with people like Paul. It's just we don't have the people on the ground to do the research and find out, or to even sometimes field and answer calls. And so if you want to work with tribes, I would recommend looking up the tribe and seeing who to contact. Don't always contact the chair, because the chair is the leader of a nation. And typically that power gets delegated down. As tribes, we'd love to speak to the president of the United States. We don't get that opportunity. We don't get to speak to the vice president. We don't get to talk to the secretary of the interior most of the time. It gets delegated down. A lot of times, tribes, just like other governments, will delegate things down too. So it might not be the chair or the council, but sometimes, like with other government meetings, you could find out when they meet. You can ask how you get placed on their agenda. So that way you could have an audience with whoever attends those government meetings and say, hey, we just want to introduce ourselves. This is who we are. Are there any resources available? For example, I said we meet the last Saturday of every month. Anybody can request to be placed on that agenda. You just have to know when it's going to happen. It's the last Saturday, and that you have to put your request in like 2 weeks ahead of time. But then you have an audience. And I do know people over at Las Vegas Paiute. I work in their tribal court. And so I'd be happy to put you in touch with somebody, Paul. I could put you in touch with the tribal attorney to see if who he thinks might be a good match for you. But I'll put my contact information in the chat, and just follow up with me afterwards, and I'll put you in contact with some people. Because sometimes that's also how it is. It's still Vegas after all. And so ask somebody if they know somebody.
Right. Thank you. That was great information. And we forget that we're so busy working in the nonprofit sectors that we forget that we do have to present ourselves to the audience that will be the most receptive, because we can fill in the gaps, we can be supportive. But yeah, thank you for reminding us that we need to get on the agenda. And, you know, we always talk about how we're low staffed and spread thin and all of that, but getting on the agenda is the first step of being able to connect. So that was very valuable. Shay, did you want to add a thought to that?
I do want to add, because Paul, I've never met you, but I can't tell you how many times during the pandemic I gave away 211. What you guys do is pretty amazing. And where I could also see your work doing is we do have a lot of urban Indians in our community, especially in Las Vegas, that could sometimes benefit from 211. And one way to get in connection with those individuals is through the Indian Center here in Las Vegas as well. They do a considerable amount of outreach, and that may also be another good connection for you, because while you have Las Vegas Paiute, you also have the Indian Center that's reaching out to a lot of our urban Indians here in the Las Vegas Valley.
I could put you in touch with the people over there at the Las Vegas Indian Center as well. And that brings up another clarification. When we say urban Indians, we're referring to people who are members or eligible to be members of their tribal governments, but they live in cities away from the reservation. And so urban Indians aren't necessarily going to be just Paiute. They could be people from anywhere in our country that just happen to live in Vegas. And that could be the result of different federal policies, people moving for work. There's a lot of reasons for that. But yeah, 60,000 urban Indians in Las Vegas. Las Vegas Indian Center is a good resource for reaching them.
Thank you. That's fantastic. I feel like we're ready for Jeopardy. If we had that round, we could, if we keep going. But thank you so much for filling in those blanks for all of us. So our next question, as we reflect on the, I'm sorry, look, put it there. As we reflect, and we are reflecting, how do we offer our daily gratitude to the Native Indigenous culture in American life today? How do we acknowledge Indigenous People Day, other holidays? How are we appropriate, and how are we appropriate in this panel discussion in terms of our celebration or attempt to celebrate our Native American Heritage Month through a panel? What else can we add to this experience? Jay, you want to start first?
Oh,
or, okay,
yes. No, Shay, if you want to go first, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that. I think it's kind of cool. I think nowadays, before, and I think Costin probably, I don't know how his childhood was different from mine, but I know, like with my grandparents, because of where they came from. So my grandfather was one who attended in a boarding school. So for him, he was pretty much taught, you keep your heritage kind of down. And so a lot of our elders were kind of that, especially went to boarding schools, were raised in that climate. And I feel like we're doing a full 360 now, or I guess 180, where it's acceptable to talk about this. We're moving away from focus so much on Columbus Day to looking at Indigenous Peoples Day. And there's more culture events. Like I'm loving everything. A lot of the space that I'm in involves land acknowledgements. And I think that is just huge. I mean, that's nothing like people ever talked about when I was growing up. And I grew up in the Las Vegas Valley. I knew about Las Vegas Paiutes because of just obviously my family making me aware of that. And I think if by talking about our tribes and our community is key, especially because we're at a time right now where the Supreme Court could be attacking tribes. And I know Costin has studied a lot about what's happened with, like, especially my tribe in Oklahoma and some rulings. And right now there's things, something like, and you guys may not know about it because I should be cognizant of the space I'm in. For those that know about children who go into foster care due to abuse and neglect, there's a special law that addresses children who are Indian, and it's called the Indian Child Welfare Act, ICWA. And right now that issue, there's a lot of issues pertinent to that law, that federal law, that makes it where before, back in the day, years ago, if an Indian child was removed from their family, more than likely the goal was to separate them from their native families or their tribe and put them in a whole different family to kind of, the word that was probably utilized a lot was to assimilate. And the ICWA law was intended to place an importance on having that child be either have their tribe control their care when they're removed, or also have a preference in placement with a tribal family or a family who is Native American. And right now there's a big case outside Red Jack Brackeen. And so some of the work I'm actually also doing, I kind of forgot about this, is I'm on the Uniform Law Commission, and we're kind of nervous that the federal laws will get messed with. And so states are now stepping up, and it's really interesting because states do not have jurisdiction over tribes. It's more of a government to government relationship, and our current governor and our past governors have always respected that. That's why we have the Indian Tribal Commission. We have a person that works right in the governor's office who focuses on relationships with the various tribes in our state and their tribal council and chair or liaison. And so as part of the work I'm doing is looking to make state laws that will recognize ICWA on the state level in case the Supreme Court basically like does away with ICWA. But I think really right now it's being cognizant of the space you're in and learning about that. And I'm excited on being on a state, hopefully being in the next state legislature, where looking at state laws to recognize maybe hopefully Indigenous Peoples Day, because right now I believe it's only recognized by Clark County or the city of Las Vegas. It is not recognized by the entire state, I don't believe. So, and Costin can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Thank you.
Growing up, I grew up on my ancestral lands, and there was no education whatsoever about tribes at all. In fact, I grew up to be a little resentful by how little people knew about tribes and tribal sovereignty and reservations. But then I had to reflect back on when I was learning about things, and how even as an Indigenous person on my ancestral lands, there was none of that. And so I realized that a lot of times people just don't know because they've never had an opportunity to know. And so I would echo Shay's comments there about finding that information, making yourself aware. And I also want to add into that some intentionality as well. a lot of people think of tribes and they think of just one group of people, like this pan-Indian movement, but that's not the case. There's actually an event coming up that was, it seems like the intentions are well. They want to celebrate traditional cultures and heritage, but they included people that aren't from the tribes in this area. And so I think they mean well, but the question that comes to mind is, did they reach out to the tribes from here? Did they educate themselves about, what tribes are from here? When I go to another tribe's lands, I don't consider myself to be indigenous anymore. I'm a guest there. I'm a visitor to their lands. And I just want to add that in there, that intentionality, being purposeful and understanding that tribes themselves are very distinct and unique. We don't all have the same traditions. We don't all have the same culture. We don't all have the same way of doing things. And that will really bode well also for you in reaching and working with tribes, because different tribes have different ways of doing things. You might speak to a chair of one tribe, but it might be an economic board for another tribe. One tribe might meet more often than the others. One tribe might want you to meet and show up in person, whereas another tribe might be okay with a virtual meeting. And so I would say that, be aware, be intentional, be sincere. If you don't know, don't pretend you do. Don't act like you do. I find a lot of times that people who ask with sincerity, who genuinely want to know and understand, are received very well. And those are people that usually make the best relationships. At the same time, I also want to give a shout out to United Way, because if you want to really offer gratitude and include and recognize Indigenous culture, I think this is a great way of doing it. You ask people who are Indigenous, who have these experiences, to come and speak on it themselves. Because sometimes what I'll see is people go and just talk about it. If you want to honor a culture, have people from that culture talk about it, tell their own stories. And so I want to say thank you for that, because I think you're doing a good job.
Thank you. It does strike me, these panel discussions, a lived experience, right? We have to hear from people who have those lived experiences, can speak from their, again, everyone has different upbringings and different exposures. So how robust to share that. And also, we've been robbed as a country of the history of so many groups educationally. We just have not had valuable history of how we've come together as a country and representation. And this is another area that now it is more inviting to ask questions and feel welcomed and show the naivete of really having not thought about it intentionally before, but now we can. So thank you both, and thank you for everyone. We have another question, and then I have a surprise round for both of you that I just thought of. So our third question, how can nonprofits help support the urban Indian and tribal communities? And again, colonies and everybody that we're learning about in different segments. But how Paul was asking intentionally about 211, a lot of the organizations represented here have the services that 211, backs up, have the help for rent and utilities and food and clothing and workforce connections, training, job placement. What is the best method? Because I know a lot of the leaders that are on the call won't necessarily get to a tribal council or on the agenda, but what would be an appropriate outreach? I'll say on behalf of United Way, we have the pre-K scholarships funded by the state. At one point, I knew that there was a pre-K at the Paiute Reservation. I heard that it's no longer open or active since COVID, but if there is home care, how can we get that group of home care providers into our family friend and network where they also get resources? So that was more than what the question said, but help us understand those steps of realistic steps of who do we call, how do we, we have 211, that's a great asset. How do we, as individual organizations, also build these relationships? Thank you.
Sure. So I would start off with the assumption, and it might be wrong, that the tribe has no idea who you are or what you do.
Mhm.
Because, like I said, tribes are governments that have to handle every kind of conceivable issue. The pandemic was especially hard. I got elected. I had a whole list of things I've been wanting to get done since I was a little kid going to these council meetings. And it was just about survival. You know, a lot of communities had some infrastructure. But for my tribal community, there was no flattening the curve because any exposure would risk exposing the entire community. And we had no medical infrastructure. We had no ventilators. We had no, I mean, we had a clinic that was open 2 days a week, but it was not any inpatient care. And so the idea wasn't even just flattening curve, it was just nothing at all. And then our businesses had to get shut down. And then we had to go back and rebudget and try to figure out how we were going to even make it as a government to the next year. And so the pandemic was especially hard. And I think a lot of tribes are still recovering from that. But again, I know there's a lot of good people out there who want to do good things. You know, reach out to the tribe, let them know who you are, what you're about. Keep trying. Don't get discouraged if you don't get a response. Sometimes it does take a while to respond, and use multiple forms of communication, a letter, a phone call. I've seen some tribal members be pretty good with social media and finding out events from that and taking it back. The idea here is just exposure and letting people know. And not only that, but as a former tribal leader myself, I know, at least within my community, there was some apprehension about working with state-based entities. Some tribes have really bad relationships with the state. In Nevada, it's pretty good. But if you have any examples of how your services have directly helped other tribal communities, that's good to know for tribes. Because it's not just what you do abstractly, but what have you actually done that has benefited other tribal communities? So that way we know that this is an option for us. Because a lot of times people just don't understand tribes. And so when they talk about things, they don't even factor in the fact that these tribes are their own governments. And so we just worry that this isn't going to apply to us. We're not eligible for this. They're not aware of our unique status legally. So
Thank
tie it
you.
into them directly.
Okay.
And it's so funny. One thing is I'm coming from one knowledge of like how my tribe does things. And one of the key things that I think we can't forget is not only do we have like Las Vegas, Paiute here in our community, or Moapa that's close by, is there is that significant urban Indian population in Las Vegas. And I know quite a few are members of Navajo or Navajo descendants. But I was just thinking of one way, when you guys say social media as a side, there are a lot of pages on social media that are pretty awesome. I'm on them. And so whenever I know there's an event in town, like I know where all the powwows are because it gets posted. And there's another community, the Nulu Art Center, which Vaughn Douglas, who's a member of Las Vegas Paiute, she has this great art facility on Maryland Parkway, and a lot of Indian urbans are becoming familiar with that community area as well as the Indian Center. So between like the Indian Center, which gets words out, I was also thinking of, because I'm sure there's a significant Cherokee population in Las Vegas, we have a newspaper. And I get my newspaper, I think like once a month, I forget. It feels like I get it pretty frequently. It's called the Phoenix. And so if there was something significant, and I don't know what our population number is here in the Las Vegas area, but I'm sure my tribe knows that. I've been meaning to like reach out, figure out to do some connectivity here in Las Vegas, but a lot of the tribes that have the larger population will have that. And I feel like Stacy Montooth, who serves in the governor's office and also sits on, I don't think she has a full position, but
She's the executive director for the Nevada Indian Commission.
Right. She usually has a lot of that data, and she is a great resource in our state. So
We've actually on the commission been trying to create opportunities during our meetings for people to come and present on services that they might provide. Just that way, it's a way to broadcast to the tribe as well.
Thank you both. I think also that we want to recognize Paige had left a comment that she had, Paige, you want to speak up? Are you available? So she had sent a message to Shay that she had been certified to be a foster parent. And she can confirm that the sensitivity was presented during the classes that she took. Paige isn't available, but we just wanted to share that. And again, thank everyone for their comments, their questions. And we'll be working with Shay and Colston again. What I'd like to close the meeting, besides thanking everyone, and find out, is there enough, and put it in the comments or raise your hand. Do we want to dig in a little deeper? Have we threw out a lot of resources and a lot of new contact information that will be in the notes that will go out, all that content. And we want to thank everyone for really thinking and for sharing outside of the celebration of a day. When we're saying it's a celebration of the month. So perhaps there's ways that we can push out any looking to marketing and everyone out there through social media to push out to this population. We have about 400 nonprofits that participate in these calls and in English and Spanish, but we can bring awareness to Native American owned businesses and restaurants and the art gallery and different spaces that people can get more familiar with the culture, and also powwows and events that are out there that bring exposure and bring joy. So always like to have the root of it be food, music, and maybe a little Greek dancing. I'm good with that. But I just wanted to thank both of you and get a sense from everybody if we want to dig in a little deeper and acknowledge as we go along with these panels, and I'll take a head nod or hands, whatever, that we will send out this information, and we are going to build these bridges. The time is now. Everyone's in a position that we are living, good, thank you, that we are living with the ramifications of COVID, and we should all know and recognize how the medical services did not get to the Native American communities at all. And so as we face all of this food and booster shots and all of that, that we also are cognizant of how do we cross over and get the medical care equity access for everybody. We're all at risk, and we want to share the resources. So we'll figure our way through this. And just getting a sense, I'm going to turn it back to Jasmine. Thanking everyone again for sharing your thoughts, all the new information from both of you, and the recognition of your years of service and your tolerance of government entities to get the job done. So that might not be the PC way to say it, but you have to participate to make change. And so thank you. We wish the best to everyone, both of you especially, and thank you for educating us. It's been completely enjoyable. And then I just want to be sure if anyone has any comments, thank you for the information. Anything else that we'll capture in the chat room. And Jasmine, I'd like you to take us away.
Thank you, Dolores. And on behalf of United Way of Southern Nevada, thank you, Colston. Thank you, Shay, for taking your time and explaining to us such important, rich information that's only going to make our community even better. And I'm excited to continue the conversation and super grateful for you both. I'm going to close off today at 2:51, so giving back everybody a little bit of time. But thank you again, and we'll share your contact information, Colston and Shay, in our resources to be sent out. And thank you both so much. And I'll leave it to you both in case if you have any last minute words, or if you'd like to say bye to us. So thank you.
No, just thank you very much. I really appreciate this. Thank you. It's always nice to be able to talk about tribes and culture and tribal sovereignty of the people. And so just giving us this opportunity to talk and this audience, it's been wonderful. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys for your time. And also thank you so much for what you do for our community. It's incredible. And I know you guys did a lot of good things, especially when we were shut down during the pandemic, and put people in touch with resources. One little warm, fuzzy story, I was able to refer a Navajo family. I was out knocking doors because I was running for office, and I ran into a Navajo family who had lost their jobs. And I think I probably gave them 211 knowing at that point to make sure they got resources that they needed. So thank you guys for everything you guys do.
I love that. And thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Thank you, Dolores. And thank you everybody for joining us today. We hope you have a great weekend and take care. Thank you so much.